Chaos Ledger Entry 60. Enron was the 7th largest company in America. It was also a complete fraud. Today we're examining the energy company that faked its own profits. Enron faked billions in profits using shell companies and accounting tricks. Enron used off-the-books shell companies to hide debt and inflate profits. When the scheme collapsed, 20,000 employees lost their jobs and their retirement savings. This is a story about how things can go catastrophically wrong, how the warning signs were ignored until it was far too late. Let's start with the context. The company had spent years building a reputation for excellence and innovation. Wall Street analysts consistently rated them as a top performer in their sector behind the glossy annual reports. However, something was fundamentally broken. Corporate culture rewarded aggressive growth over sustainable practices. Employees who raised concerns were silenced, sidelined, or shown the door. Board of directors collected their fees and asked few questions. External auditors signed off on statements that should have raised red flags. Regulatory filings painted a picture of a company in perfect health. The numbers didn't add up for anyone willing to look closely. The gap between perception and reality was about to become impossible to ignore. Markets operate on trust, and that trust was being systematically eroded. What followed would become a textbook case of corporate governance failure. Now, let's look at what was happening behind the scenes. In the late 1990s, Enron was the darling of Wall Street. Its stock price soared. CEO Jeffrey Skilling and CFO Andrew Fastow had a problem: the company wasn't actually profitable. To understand what went wrong, we need to go back to the beginning. The story starts years before the crisis made headlines. At the time, everything appeared to be going perfectly. No one could have predicted what was about to unfold. The foundation for disaster was being laid, brick by invisible brick. What looked like success was actually a carefully constructed illusion. The warning signs were there, but they were easy to dismiss. Industry experts praised the approach as innovative and forward-thinking. Behind closed doors, however, a different conversation was taking place. The gap between public perception and internal reality was growing wider, and then things got worse. Their solution was shell companies. Enron created hundreds of off-the-books entities. These shells bought Enron's failing assets at inflated prices, creating fake revenue on paper. As the situation deteriorated, the response made everything worse. Instead of acknowledging the problem, leadership doubled down. Every decision from this point forward compounded the original mistake. The people who could have stopped it were incentivized to look away. Reports that should have triggered alarms were buried in bureaucracy. The momentum of the crisis was now unstoppable. Those who tried to intervene found themselves isolated and ignored. The organization's immune system against bad decisions had failed completely. What began as a manageable issue had metastasized into a catastrophe. The point of no return had been passed without anyone realizing it. This is when it all came crashing down. The accounting firm Arthur Andersen signed off on everything. They shredded documents when the SEC started asking questions. Enron's stock hit $9 per share. When the truth finally emerged, the reaction was swift and merciless. The unraveling happened with a speed that shocked even the skeptics. Markets reacted within minutes, erasing billions in value. Damage was not just financial, it was deeply human. Lives were upended. Careers were destroyed. Trust was shattered. Media coverage was relentless, and every new detail was worse. Investigations launched at every level of government. The blame game began even as the smoke was still clearing. Those responsible scrambled to protect themselves while others suffered. The full scope of the disaster was beyond what anyone had imagined. The aftermath was brutal. October 2001, Enron reported a $618 million loss. The stock crashed to under ones. The company filed for bankruptcy. 20,000 employees lost their jobs and retirement savings. In the months and years that followed, the reckoning was thorough. Congressional hearings produced dramatic testimony and few answers. Lawsuits piled up as victims sought justice through the courts. Some executives faced prison. Others walked away with golden parachutes. Regulations were rewritten in an attempt to prevent a repeat. The question remained, would the changes actually make a difference? The industry promised reform, but institutional memory is short. Survivors of the disaster formed support groups and advocacy organizations. The financial cost was staggering, but the human cost was immeasurable. History had recorded another entry in the ledger of catastrophic failure. Here's the pattern that keeps repeating. Accounting rules were rewritten after Enron, but creative bookkeeping never went away. It just got more sophisticated. The most disturbing aspect is that this keeps happening. The same pattern repeats across industries, countries, and decades. Each generation believes it has learned from the mistakes of the past. Yet the fundamental incentives that cause these disasters remain unchanged. Short-term thinking rewarded at the expense of long-term stability. Let's take a moment to visualize the scale of what happened. Think about the thousands of people whose lives were affected, the families who lost their savings, the communities devastated, the trust that was broken and could never be fully restored. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are human stories, and for every person directly affected, there were countless more who watched and wondered if they could be next. So what can we learn from this? First, trust but verify, especially when the stakes are high. Second, look for the incentives. They explain more than any official narrative. Third, complexity creates blind spots. The bigger the system, the more places disaster can hide. Fourth, whistleblowers are the immune system of organizations. They need protection, not punishment. Finally, remember that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. These patterns are predictable. The companies and names change, but the underlying mechanics remain the same. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We release new deep dives every week, exploring the most expensive mistakes in business history. Leave a comment below. Which company or industry should we investigate next? Share this video with someone who needs to understand why these failures keep happening. Chaos Ledger continues. Until next time, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more videos.